And I'm the head nutritionist at NAF, and we're going to talk about does my horse need a supplement? Question we hear quite a lot. I'm Kate. I'm a registered nutritionist and registered animal technologist with NAF. I've been there for just over 20 years now, so just about getting used to the job now. And we're primarily going to look at balancing the diet this evening. Obviously, there are all sorts of different places where we can use a supplement, and we will touch on that later. But generally, we're going to look at whether we need them to help balance the diet. So why supplement? That's the first question. And I don't know about you with horse owners amongst you and those of you who maybe might work with horses as well. But whenever I tell somebody what I do for a living, that I'm an animal nutritionist and I mainly work with horses, then the first thing they say is, don't horses just eat grass? And, you know, our life would be so much easier if they did. And maybe some of them do. This bunch of ponies you're seeing here are some native fell ponies up on the fells in Cumbria. I'm lucky enough to ride some of these. And they do very well in their natural setting. But of course, we have to consider the modern horse. And the modern horse, we ask an awful lot more of them, whether it's eventing, racing, dressage, you know, whatever we're doing with them, we're asking an awful lot more of them over and above what they would naturally be doing. So it makes sense that their diet needs to supply over and above. And that's just as true for the leisure horse, hacking, doing lessons and such like, as it is for the elite athletes. So we can't just feed them grass. We can't just turn them out. And there's also the issue of poor grazing around these days as well. So moving on. Why do we use a supplement? Well, poor quality grazing is quite an issue in the UK. Increasingly, people have limited access to good grazing, and the grazing they do have, the nutrient values of that are changing. We've always been prone to some grazing deficiencies. Things like selenium has always been quite deficient in our soil, but increasingly we're seeing more and more like copper, zinc, magnesium, with more, dare I say it, global warming and more rainfall, then you get much more leaching from the soil. So grazing itself is no longer really doing the job. So we may think we're going to use concentrate, the bagged feeds, to make up the shortfall. But here we have an issue of underfeeding of concentrates. So most people, certainly most owners of leisure horses, such as myself, you know, if you were to read the recommended feeding rate on the side of a bag, you would be really quite surprised and quite possibly quite horrified at the amount they seem to think you're going to feed. So a lot of horses are living on a lot lower level of concentrates. And that lower level means that they're not having the vitamins and minerals in the scoop that the feed manufacturer thinks they're feeding. So together with the deficiencies in the forage, we're leading towards a deficient diet. So we can use supplements to balance the diet for general health. And that means making up a shortfall of the micronutrients. And very typically, we often look at pre and probiotics. Oh, I've just spotted a spelling mistake there. It should say pre and probiotics for digestive health. So very often we put a little bit of digestion help in the supplements as well. But the micronutrients, like the name suggests, are nutrients that are required in very small amounts. So these are the vitamins, trace elements, some of the minerals, although some of the minerals are required in larger amounts as well. The amino acids would come into micronutrients as well. So nutrients that are required in very, very small amounts, but that doesn't mean they're not necessary. They are absolutely necessary to life. So selenium is a good example, actually. If you take the typical 500 kilogram working horse, their selenium requirement for the day is roughly 1 milligram. Now, to put that in context, if you imagine a typical teaspoon normally holds about 5 grams or 5,000 milligrams. So your horse requires 1/5000th of a teaspoon of selenium. It's a tiny, tiny amount. However, without that, you're going to have muscle problems. If they're breeding animals, you'll have subfertility. So all sorts of issues are seen by a deficiency, even though it's required in such a tiny amount. We've got it right on this side. So pre and probiotics as well. Things like the live probiotic yeast supplement and prebiotic sugars. People sometimes get a little bit worried when we mention the word sugar, but sugar is entirely natural to the horse's diet. Grass has an awful lot of sugar in it, as do most plants, but prebiotics are specialized sugars. So things like moss and phos, effectively what they do is that they feed the probiotics. So pre and pro are often fed together because they work hand in hand, and that in turn will help the fiber digestion in the hindgut. So why use supplements? Why not stick to the bagged feeds that have got all the vitamins and minerals in them? They've very often got the probiotics as well. So why not just feed your bag feed? Why do you need a supplement on top of that? Well, as we touched on earlier, this issue of underfeeding concentrates. An awful lot of horses are good doers. In fact, obesity is probably the biggest health problem in the equine world. So something like 60% of horses are considered to be overweight, and I think it's about 30% that are considered to be obese. So it is a big problem, no pun intended, and that means that we're not often feeding large levels of concentrates. And often, again, at this time of year, those of us who are working owners and you've got to fit in a full-time job around riding the horse, it's very easy to understand that these horses are perhaps not getting as much exercise as they should really do either. So we're underfeeding concentrates, but also there is a very positive reason for feeding supplements, and that's the move towards natural feeding, which we would definitely want to encourage. So more and more research is showing that feeding concentrate feeds are associated with all sorts of problems in the horse. So things like ulcers, laminitis, obesity, behavior issues, we could go on, but essentially horses are not designed to be eating bucket feeds of large amounts of starchy cereals, and it's much better to move towards that natural feeding diet, which is fibre focused. And supplements very, very well fit into that fibre focused diet. Of course, there is also the issue that keeping horses is not cheap. I think any of us will know that. We love them dearly, but they are not cheap. And therefore, if we can find a way that helps us to save a few pennies without compromising the quality of their diet, in fact, by improving the quality of their diet, then that's something we certainly want to look at. So let's see how we can save with supplements. We're going to take a typical working horse here, 500 kilogram working horse, and that horse will need round about 10 to 12.5 kilos of feed daily. That's dry matter feed daily. So horses typically need 2 to 2.5%. 2% would be the level for most leisure horses, 2.5% for the hard working horses. So this is what I call my my textbook diet. So if you read I'm just going to get my laser pointer. There we go. If you read the equine nutrition books on feeding, and look at the textbook approach, then you could well come up with something like this. And also if you take the manufacturer's recommendations. So the levels fed here are the manufacturer's recommendations for the chaff in the bucket and the leisure mix. And that's how much of the leisure mix you need to feed to be getting all the vitamins and minerals. We've made up the rest of the diet with hay to meet the energy requirement. This figure here is the energy requirement for a 500 kilogram horse in medium work. Okay. So can anybody, if you can take yourselves off mute for a second if you're happy to speak on the recorder, can any of you see anything in that diet that you wouldn't be very happy with? I'll give you a minute or two and then I'll help you out. No, you're all staying very coy, right? So my problem with this diet is the amount of concentrate feed and the amount of bucket feed. So this is the diet we need. We're following the guidelines to feed the amount we need, but actually we're feeding quite a high level of concentrates. And certainly, although we wouldn't class the chaff as a concentrate, it's a good fiber source. It's still part of the bucket feed. So here you've got 4 kilos out of a total of 9.5, 10 kilos. You know, you've got 40% at least that's going in the bucket. And to me, that's very detrimental. So it's high concentrates, low fiber, and that means a short feed time. So remember, horses evolved to be trickle feeding out in the open. So here they've got a short feed time, and that is never going to be good for their health and vitality. And that short feed time together with concentrate feeds means that we have a risk of starch associated issues. Those issues, I say, might be something like ulcers, laminitis, all those issues we touched on earlier. But increasingly we find that almost anything that can go wrong with a horse can be linked back to this inappropriate diet. So I don't really like this diet. I'd much rather look at a more natural diet. So let's look at it a different way. So this is the diet we've just devised in order to get the energy requirement you need for that 500 kilogram horse. And a lot of people will tell you, or they'll try and tell me, that you can't feed enough energy by just feeding forage. Well, there you go. 10 kilos in total, the vast majority, 9 kilos, coming from hay, and actually you've got a little bit more energy than you had before. So you absolutely can feed enough energy from a forage diet. We've put the optimum balancer in here in order to feed all the micronutrients and the pre and probiotics. So actually we can take the leisure mix out altogether. We don't need that because all the micronutrients are in here. The chaff just gives them something to, you actually don't need it. You could feed all of this as hay, but they like something to nibble on when they come in. So we'll keep, and I don't have nothing against the alfalfa chaffs. They're a good source of fiber. So we've got a much more natural looking diet. So we've got a high fiber, natural trickle feeding diet. We've got low starch, very low starch, meaning it's a very safe, suitable diet. So balanced for essential micronutrients. So here we've got the difference between the two. We've got the standard diet, very much concentrated on the bucket and the vitamins and minerals coming from a concentrate diet. Concentrate feed. Here we've got the vitamins and minerals from the optimum balancer, nice high fiber diet. And also when you start to look at it, you've got a saving of about £10.80 per month. I actually haven't updated these figures recently, so it's probably a bit more of a saving these days. But when I last looked at this, it was just over £10 a month. So what could we do with that £10.80 a month? How exciting is this for us? So if we think about roughly 6 months of winter, I know at this point in the year it feels a lot longer than that, but let's say we get roughly 6 months of winter. That could be a new set of shoes. And it could be a new set of shoes for your horse, or even, dare I suggest it, for you. You know, I know this will come as a surprise to a lot of you, but you are allowed to spend some of your money on yourself and not on your horse. So we can make a few savings by making simple adjustments to the diet, but absolutely crucially, without compromising the quality of that diet. You're actually improving the diet as well as making those savings. So we're naturally balancing the diet with a supplement balancer. And there are all sorts of different balancers available. We have the concentrated, that's my favourite actually, the Optimum. I think it's a great product. For the good doer, we have things like Slim Pellet. Got some really great names. Vallegro actually lives on Slim Pellets. He loves it because he is a very good doer. And then we have things like the more traditional powdered approach, like pink powder. Your choice will depend on you and your horse, but there are all sorts of options available out there for you. So that's how we balance the diet in terms of micronutrients. The other area I wanted to spend a little bit of time looking at was electrolytes, because again, essentially this is balancing. This is balancing what's been lost through work. So we'll go over what are they for, how are they lost, and how do we replace them. So electrolytes are the body's essential ions, sometimes known as body salts. And they are made up of sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and chloride. The two most important on a daily basis are sodium and chloride, good old salt, basically, sodium chloride. And the easiest way to make sure your horse is getting enough sodium chloride is simply to hang up a salt lick in the stable in the field and allow them free access. Horses, like any grazing animal, will self-supplement for salt on a maintenance basis. When it comes to working horses, you need to add a little bit more to their feed and make sure they're getting it. But for day-to-day maintenance, they will self-supplement just like any grazing animal would. The role of these electrolytes is to regulate hydration, and I think we would probably all know that they're lost in sweat. So you can see them. I think this is a great picture, this driving picture. You can see the sweat being lost there. And these losses can be quite significant. So in working horses, they have recorded levels of up to 5 litres an hour for sweat. Now, that is a very high level. Imagine your typical jerry can of linseed oil or cider vinegar or whatever. That's how much 5 litres looks like. So it is a very high level, and you're probably not going to get that in the UK because it depends on humidity and temperature as well as the amount of working. But it does give you an idea of how much sweat they can lose. So if we take that example, in just 2 hours that you might do in a morning's hunting or an afternoon at a show, in just 2 hours you're losing 10 litres of sweat. 10 litres of sweat would contain 60 grams of chloride, and 60 grams of chloride is 10% of the body's total chloride. And I always think it's quite surprising that you can go out and, have a good whiz round with your horse, working them quite hard, okay, but just in an afternoon, you've lost 10% of one of their essential nutrients. And of course, the same would apply, similar figures apply to the sodium, calcium, magnesium, and such like. So it's really important to replace them, otherwise you're going to get into a situation of dehydration. And the signs to look out for dehydration, the pinch test. On horses, we would normally do the pinch test halfway up the neck, just literally between your finger and thumb, pinch a bit of skin, take hold of it, let it go again. It should go straight back down nice and quickly. You can try it on the back of your hand as well if you like, and you'll see how it works on the back of your hand, and it should go down nice and quickly. If it's slow to return, then that's a sign of dehydration. Similar to the pinch test is on the gums with horses. You might just roll back their lip and press your thumb against their gums. The nice pink gums should go white, and they should come straight back to pink again immediately after. If you miss that stage, then the next stage is going to be lethargy and poor performance. So it's quite possible that if you're at a show and you've perhaps got 3 classes, you get to the last class and there's a few too many rails down, they've missed a stride, they've not, you've made a bit of a cricket score of it. It's quite possible that you weren't ready for that level of the class, but it's also possible that the previous 2 classes have taken that out of the horse. So really important to think about rehydrating through a competition. And don't forget yourself as well. Important to make sure you replace your own electrolytes. So if you miss that stage, we're then into more advanced dehydration, which is things like sunken eyes, depression, strong smelling urine. That makes sense if you think about it logically. If the horse is dehydrated, then anything he does excrete is going to be very, very concentrated. So there will be much less of it, but it will be much stronger smelling and darker coloured. So when should we be replacing electrolytes? Following hard work. In warm weather, certainly, but not only in warm weather. Horses are actually pretty good at dissipating sweat. Very often they can have been sweating when you don't realise they've been sweating. They have a very large surface area, so it's quite easy for it to evaporate. So if you've done any amount of reasonably hard work and the horse has been putting a bit of effort in, then even in the middle of winter, we want to be thinking about electrolytes. As a general rule, I would normally say if you take your saddle off and the saddle cloth is a bit damp, then that tells you they've sweated, even if you can't see any. Make sure that you feed it with plenty of water. So electrolytes are designed to be added to water or maybe fed with a very wet, sloppy feed, something like a small amount of really well-soaked sugar beets. So that encourages them to eat. Or you can train them to take electrolytes out of a bucket of water as well. But when you think about that 5 litres that's been lost, most of that is water. So it's just as important to replace the water as it is to replace the electrolytes. So we say to ensure the water is warm. This is simply to encourage drinking. Horses are not like people. If we go out and run a race or get ourselves really hot and sweaty, then generally we love a nice ice cold drink, don't we? But horses don't, and very cold water will put them off drinking. So ensure the water is warm. We're not talking about making cups of tea for the horse. So tepid is the word I prefer to use. So just not quite cold, not quite chilled, and that will encourage them to drink. And we do recommend not to feed electrolytes as a concentrate. In other words, something like an electrolyte syringe. And the reason for that is the same reason as the importance of feeding plenty of water. If you only give them a syringe and they're not taking the water on with it, then you can actually further dehydrate an already dehydrated horse. So if you take a nice concentrated syringe full of strong electrolytes and shoot it down their throat, if they haven't got enough water in the system, then actually what happens is that concentration of salt will draw water out of their system and you actually further dehydrate them. So that's why we don't really like syringes. We prefer electrolytes that are fed in water or in wet feed. And then you can't really go wrong. So that essentially was the balancing part of the diet. So how to balance with vitamins and minerals using a nice natural high fiber diet and also replacing those essential electrolytes. We'll have a very short look now at beyond diet balancing. So we can use supplements to maximize health, vitality and performance in pretty much any area of the horse. And for this, we're often using things called Nutraceuticals. A nutraceutical is one of those words that's, I think it's called a portmanteau, which is made up of different words shoved together. And obviously nutraceutical comes from nutrition and pharmaceutical. And all it means is using nutrition as a therapy tool. And I've put this very famous quote from Hippocrates. Hippocrates dates from 400 BC and is considered to be the father of modern medicine. And he famously said, let food be thy medicine and medicine thy food. So this is what we're thinking about here. Whether he actually did say that or not, I have to say it's open to a little bit of debate, but it's a great quote anyway. But actually, while I was looking at images for this talk, I came across another one that I thought, to me, sums up what we do, and it was even stronger. So I've put that one in for you as well. I really like this. Every time you eat or drink, you are either feeding disease or fighting it. And I think that's a really, really positive way to think about what we're doing, what we're putting into our horses' diets. Of course, we should think about our own diets as well. But what we're thinking about our horses' diet is what we're putting into their diet. Is it helping them to fight disease or feed disease? So here at NAF, we have targeted nutrition for all sorts of different areas, for joints, digestion, calming, breathing, hooves, breeding now. We've got a great new product for fertility in stallions, which we're really excited about. So as I say, I'm not going to go over these in any detail because if I started talking about them, we'd be here all night. But just to say, so pretty much anywhere that your horse has a health challenge, or even you just want to get more performance out of them, then the right nutrition in the right diet can certainly help to do that. Oh, and there's a veterinary support as well. So does my horse need a supplement? Well, we would say yes, it does. You can use a supplement to balance a natural diet, to replace those losses, and to support health, vitality and performance. As this lovely picture taken at the BRC Championship shows, you can get a really super looking horse by feeding them the right diet and the right training and everything else as well that goes into it.